All right, here we go. Monday. It's funny. I love Mondays. Mondays are so much fun because it's the day before our either our call-in show or our new group show, our roundtable episodes. Those are a blast. Tomorrow's call-in show I've been looking forward to all week long.
Yeah, likewise. I'm just figuring out my background here. I forgot to set this. There we go. Yeah, the Tuesdays are a blast. I'm really glad we added those two in there because and that's kind of the fun of it is with these lives. We almost had someone come on and join us today, and they're not here obviously, but with all these lives that we do, they're episodes. Like we post them as episodes so we can use them for like so many different things, and we have so many options for like what to do with them. And so it's fun to just be able one week to be like, yeah, should we add a call-in show? Yeah, should we get some Patreon people on some of these calls? It's like, yeah, sure, fuck it, why not?
And on that note, actually, I was thinking it might be fun to open it up to other creators to at least get in a queue or a list for consideration for some of these like Monday Raw episodes. I thought that might be fun. I was also thinking because I run across TikTok I run across things on TikTok all the time where I think to myself, I wonder what Andrew would think about this. And sometimes it's fun stuff where I'll send you the link, like the Anunnaki Queen, for example, that kind of thing. And sometimes it's more thought-provoking stuff. And I was thinking it'd be interestingly once every month or two, whenever we got a good collection of them, like you just collect things that you'd want to get my take on from TikTok, and I'll just collect things that I want to get your take, and then we'll just do an episode where we just show the clips and see the reactions and talk about the clips back to back and just cover some of the weird and wonderful shit that's out there because humanity
Humanity is a fascinating thing, but yeah, I'm definitely down to do that because that'll, I don't know, all that stuff just makes things even more easy for us on these calls. But yeah, if we have some interesting videos, because there's so many out there, and there's so many that I'm like, people, especially because people think we're saying the same sort of stuff as a lot of people that fit into that, and it's very few are, because it's not even about the stuff. It comes down to what we're embodying, but also like we're willing to talk about everything too, because everything is within the realm of being reality. It's just your experience. It's not about getting as deep as possible all the time, although that can be fun too. But like it's a fun way to spend things. It's not the root of our experience, because the root of our experience is the experience. It's not necessarily about any given topic or idea. So yeah, I mean, long story short, I think that would be dope to as we are scrolling through things, to come across videos that I don't know, just find interesting. Even could be anything, but I honestly, I rarely scroll through TikTok. Like I am in and out of that platform. Like I post our videos, and even sometimes like I'll post it on Instagram and then kind of forget to post it on TikTok for a little while. But yeah, I because I'll get lost in that vortex of it. I'm better about it now, but there's times where it's like, oh shit, 45 minutes, an hour has gone by and still stuck in that vortex. So I kind of steer clear of it for the most part, but maybe I will for this episode.
That's kind of funny. Yeah, for me, I don't know. I think it's just because I've very specific things that capture my attention. So my TikTok is generally pretty interesting. Like I see things about like religious texts and the original translations of them, or I see scientific breakthroughs, or sometimes I'll see like the emotional breakthroughs and stuff like that because I'm interested in self-help and people conquering depression and anxiety and stuff like that. So I'll see some emotional stuff and cat videos. That's pretty much it. But yeah, most of my TikTok feed's pretty interesting as a whole. And when I'm not doing that or just going for a walk or something, I'm always looking up new articles and stuff that are released every day about scientific breakthroughs and different things that are happening in the world. Like I really enjoy exposure to information as a whole. At one point it used to really overwhelm me because I would get all caught up in it and it'd be like, oh, this is happening, oh, this is happening, oh, this is an injustice, and I'd get really upset about all the information I was taking in. Now it's just Oh wow, there's so much out there. There's just so much information, and it's always so interesting to see how often the information is skewed to one side or the other. And when you realize that, then it's really just about taking it in. But I find TikTok to be a fascinating app for the simple reason that the algorithm really does try to figure out what captures your attention or what might be relevant to the things that you've already paid attention to. And so it's kind of like your brain, right? The more that you focus on certain thoughts, the more your brain trains itself to be able to think about those thoughts. And so on TikTok, the more you focus on certain content, the more you're training it to focus on certain content. So it's an excellent, excellent tool in terms of curating your attention. I know I've said this previously, but it's true. You watch what you're really drawn to. Just watch TikTok. It'll show you. Give it a week of your attention here and there, and it will start to show you the things that really catch your attention. If you're like, oh, it's always showing me all this stupid shit, that's because that's what you've been paying attention to. That's the funniest part about it. So it's quite revealing when you use it that way. So it's helped in a couple of ways for me, because I'll notice that when my content or the content that I'm starting to see gets a little too dry, like it's a little bit too much on the science and philosophy end, that's when I know, like, right, I should probably pay attention to humor. Like there's people going through stuff. And so I'll switch gears. I'll go start checking out all my followers, the people that I follow, which are a lot of my followers. I only follow my followers for the most part. And I'll check out their content, and that will suddenly diversify everything I'm watching. But yeah, it's a great tool in that way. And it's funny to me that I follow my followers for the most part, as many as I can, because there's a limit on TikTok. You can't follow over 10K or something like that. So I stopped at a certain point, but I used to always try and follow my followers if they were making content. Now it's just too much. and the turnover rate is huge. I'll follow someone, like a month later, they hate me.
Yeah, your turnover rate is probably one of the best in the game in terms of the rapidness of it. But I don't know, it doesn't necessarily drop off. There's always people coming in and out. So, but I guess that's the balance between people, something hits and lets them feel better, and then you talk about actually getting better, and it completely contradicts the thing that made them feel better. Not contradicts, but for within them, it contradicts, their idea of what they clung to on that one video. So it is very funny to see how many people go in and out. And I've certainly, I lost, I think after the gender pronoun / dress video back-to-back days, I think I lost like 5,000 followers on Instagram from that. But then, and when people ask about that, they're like, oh, does that freak you out? And it's like, no, I actually enjoy it, because, as much as it makes people run away, a lot of people are like, oh wow, thanks for saying this, I've been thinking about this stuff. So that those people just create a deeper connection, or you just created a deeper connection with those people. So yeah, it balances out, and it really just, like, if you post videos that are controversial, just like strengthens the people who are following, and they're actually engaged in it, instead of just being on the fringe, and a couple of videos make them feel good, and then some they don't like, whatever, they're just not as interested in everything. So yeah, I really enjoy when I lose followers, because I know that was probably a solid video to get out there. So
Well, that's how you know, right? Isn't it interesting? Like, more often than not, if you make your video as egotistical as possible, you really focus in on that egotistical value, and that sense of this is going to complete you, or it's just straight up distraction, you'll probably do pretty well in terms of traffic. But if you were to make something that's fairly thought-provoking, deep, something that changes your perspective of things, but actually requires you to change your perspective of things, change yourself, that may not hit a lot of people, but the people that it does hit it has more of an impact. And I think that we get so caught up in thinking about the virality of something, how quickly it will spread from person to person to person, that we don't think about, but how deeply does it spread from person to person to person, outside of being like a catchy tune that they can't seem to forget, or something that was funny and makes them laugh over and over and over again to a certain point. Is it changing them? Is it something that's sticking, or is it just something that they're going to laugh about and then forget, and it's just going to become the next thing in 2 days? I think it's something to consider, because while we don't have a huge following, though we do have quite a growing following, I just wanted to say to the person listening, it's nice to have you here. There's a lot of us that are showing up lately. It's not about the size of the following. It really is about how deeply it's connected to each person, how deeply it's resonating with each of the people who are listening and participating in the groups, right? And this is the thing about the groups that I love. It's funny. I was a big part of my life now that we're full time here on Dualistic Unity is rendering video. And you might see Andrew and I release like 5 episodes a week, maybe 6. It really depends. But the real work in terms of rendering is on Patreon. We release 10 to 16 hours of additional footage on Patreon every single week. Every single week, we have groups 5 days a week where we talk to people and we share insights and we listen to them and we answer questions and we go through things that we may not go through here on the podcast. There are just hundreds of hours at this point on Patreon of just group after group after group with people having insights, having breakthroughs, suffering through things, sharing things that inspire other people. It's so much better than the podcast. And it's not to insult Andrew and me, because we do our best here to create interesting content and have a conversation that we enjoy, but humanity, right? To see how many of us are out there just going through it, to have that conversation where somebody, like yesterday, perfect example, somebody was shocked to find out that Andrew and I still go through stuff. That in one of the episodes we're like, yeah, oh yeah, no, I go in and out of that too, for sure, absolutely. Frustrations, expectations, getting back, lost in the stuff. It's easy to form an idea of someone, especially when you only see them performing a certain role or acting in a certain way or in a certain environment. And so when Andrew and I are on here, it's very easy to come up with the idea like, oh, well, these guys are insightful. They must be always insightful and on the ball. And we're in the same boat that you are. And so these groups are an excellent opportunity, not just for you to share where you're at, but for us to relate to you, to tell you exactly how it is that we're going through something similar, or that we've gone through something similar, or that we've yet to go through something similar. It really depends on the situation, but at least we can talk to you and break down that bridge that may exist right now between you and us, just simply by virtue of the fact that you don't have that opportunity to chat with us. You can only have an idea based on what you're hearing and what you're seeing right now. Right. So definitely, I guess the whole point of that is, if you like this content and you want to see more and you want to see a wider variety in terms of conversation, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/dualistic unity. And the reason I keep talking about Patreon, and I know I do a lot in the recent episodes, somebody actually said in one of the live streams, this live stream sponsored by Patreon. The reason that I say this is simply because Andrew and I are working so very hard to make sure that we do not have to go out and peddle other products that we don't believe in. Like, we don't want to make this into something that is sheerly focused on the money. And so we try to focus on the community and on the time that we can put into it, so on and so forth. But obviously we still have to live. We still have rent and we still have bills that we have to pay. And there's considerations in our life. And so rather than go out looking for corporate money, which again, it's going to come in its own time as the podcast grows, we'll get more sponsors in terms of advertisers and stuff like that. But as of right now, it's really the community that keeps this going. And we are really, really grateful to the community. So we put a lot of time and energy and attention into Patreon, because quite honestly, it's those supporters that keep this afloat and have been for the last year and a bit now. So I just wanted to give them a quick shout out. And again, let you know, if you haven't joined us on Patreon, it's totally worth it, in my opinion. And I say that knowing how much we put into it week to week to week. Not only that, though, you get to see a lot of the people that you've seen on some of our groups, like Amanda, for example, who is often in our group. Some of our roundtable guests are often in our groups. And so the conversations are always very insightful. And we appreciate everything that people bring to the table. That said, again, tomorrow is our second call-in show. There will be a link that you can go to. I will provide that tomorrow during the live stream. You can click the link, agree to the terms. There will be a phone number or a link that you can click to join us on the screen. And you can chat with us for 10 or 15 minutes while we record an episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. I'm very, very excited about that. And that all said, one last thing. the dating workshop, which we finished this weekend, which was so much fun. I thought that was great. It's interesting how something as simple as dating can get so convoluted and so misunderstood simply because it comes from a place of egotism. It comes from a place of trying to complete yourself as opposed to an expression of yourself being complete. It's like everything else. And so it was really nice to be able to sit down for 4 hours over the weekend, 2 hours each day, and just go through, the foundation of avoiding toxicity before you even get out there. And then some of the basics of avoiding toxicity once you're in the mix. And so, yeah, I was really grateful for everybody who showed up. We had quite a big group too, which was really nice. Anybody wondering, that copy of the workshop will be available on the website later on this week.
Yeah, workshop was a blast. It was really fun. And for anyone who's listening, if you were in the workshop, very much appreciate you for making it what it was. That's why, we split our workshops kind of half and half. It's not just us talking the whole time. We do a full hour out of the 2 hours each day of Q&A because we want people involved. We want people informing the conversation, and we want it to be, curated to what you're going through. And so that's why we do that, because everyone who does have a question or thought or insight or anything about, the topic that we're going through in the workshop is going to be involved in making the workshop what it is, because they have questions and everyone's able to share everything they have. That's why we leave so much time open for it. But yeah, just to harp on Patreon one more time, it is an amazing place. Like it's easily my favorite form of content is the Patreon groups. And as much as I love the podcast, I love, posting videos and whatnot, it's the community and the interactions that we get there that are so much fun. And yeah, we very much appreciate everyone on there, because that's a big part of how we're making an income right now. Like, we quit our jobs, we're doing this all the time. We're doing, 5 days of groups a week, 5 days of episodes a week, sometimes 6 episodes a week, every single week. And we're just putting out stuff for everyone else and for ourselves, because we very much just enjoy doing this. For sure, this is fulfilling in itself. But that being said, gotta eat, gotta have something above my head and some clothes and whatnot. So we very much appreciate everyone on Patreon.
Yeah, I wanted to add something to that. Actually, it's interesting because I was a life coach for a long time. I know that there's certain practices that you would recommend to somebody in a life coaching business, and we blatantly don't follow those practices. I just wanted to say that the Patreon supporters really do allow us to do one other thing, which is to apply the insights that we're trying to talk about on here. And what I mean is that because we have Patreon supporters who are willing to help us from month to month, whether it be $5, $25, or $100 a month, the fact is that we don't have to charge as much for our workshops. And I've had more than a few of my peers tell me, why are you charging that little for your workshop? And my answer is always, because it's helpful to people, and it would be helpful if they could access it. Not everybody can access a workshop that's $100 a ticket. Not everybody can afford to do that, once a month or even once every 6 months. I get that for sure. And so we really do try and make it so the workshops are affordable as possible. And of course, our Patreon supporters actually get like a 30 to a 50% discount on workshops that are already affordable. And it really is the goal of ours to not make this a cash cow by any means, but to make it so that way, the more money that does come in, whether it be through advertisers or supporters, the cheaper we can make it for everybody else who's joining the community to have access to certain things like tickets to the retreat. That's a perfect example. Right now, we very much have to operate the retreat as a business. There's a certain amount of profit and there's a certain amount of cost. There's a certain amount of liability. There's a certain amount of all of this. And so that's got to come out of the ticket price and so on. And we try and keep it as low as possible. We look for the best deals we can. But if we had more advertiser revenue coming in, for example, that could help subsidize that, we'd be able to give away, 1 or 2 tickets, or we'd be able to drop those tickets by $100, $200 each, just because we aren't looking at the necessity of having to survive. So it goes a long way in terms of community support. And whether it's monetary support on Patreon or it's you sharing our stuff on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it might be, I just wanted to say, I've seen a lot of those around lately. Thanks so much. Like, it's really weird for me to see somebody say exercising on a video showing like how motivated they are, and the background of that is my voice saying something. I always find that just bizarre, but we really appreciate the shout outs, and we really appreciate you just telling your friends and people you know about Dualistic Unity. We really appreciate all this, because that's the stuff that makes the community grow. It's your attention. However that attention comes about, it's your attention. And it's just like anything else in your life. If your attention is on freedom, if your attention is on letting go, that's what you're going to continue to see in your life. And if all of our intentions are to let go, and this conversation is how we facilitate that process, and we're just paying attention on that process, then this will grow as a result of that attention. And I do believe that. I really don't think it's about money at all. Again, there's the necessity, there's the world that we live in, and the symbolism of money and its unfortunate role, but we're going to make that work for us, because eventually it's going to get to the point where we're going to need less and less support. There's going to be more and more coming in, and we're going to be able to do things like create supports for community, or do big lavish things that embarrass rich people who are super selfish. I look forward to doing that. I really do. I look forward to doing things that are just blatantly selfless for the sake of showing everybody you can do that, and not have to make it about yourself. You know, you can do that and not necessarily take it as a tax write-off, or do it because it's a tax write-off. You can just do nice things. You can just do things for yourself through other people. That's okay. And if we can normalize that, I think that in itself would create a hell of a ripple. Wouldn't that be fun to talk about with other people on television, or otherwise, talking to other creators like, hey, guess how much shit we gave away this week? That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that day. And yeah, with the community and the growing community, like I think a lot of people, we recently had an episode about spiritual psychosis, and there's a ton to that, but I think a lot of people, when they start to, you know, wake up to seeing things a little bit more clearly, seeing a little bit closer to, you know, what the reality they are in a society that's so far from that, it can kind of make you think you might be going crazy, because everyone around you is like, what are you talking about? Like, you're not what you think. I'm this is me, this is it. And it's like, who's telling you that? What's telling you you're not also that? Well, it makes me comfortable to be limited to this, blah, blah, blah. You know, people have all of their different responses, but a lot of people do, when they start to ask those questions, like, look around, surrounded by people who don't want to ask those questions, who, when you do bring them questions, they tell you to shut up, fuck off, or, you know, go away, basically. And so that's my favorite part of Dualistic Unity, is that we have been able to reach people across the world who haven't, you know, they've been going through things thinking that they might be crazy, because they're having recognitions without so many concepts and labels, that in a world full of believing that concepts and labels are the truth, they're going to tell you that you're crazy if you recognize that they're not. And so we've been able to, you know, reach people with this conversation who are thinking about the same types of things. And that's, you know, the best part. Like, on any of the calls that we have or anything, like, there's people from around the world, you know, waking up at 2 a.m. sometimes to hop on, you know, a Patreon group chat or something. And so it's just fun to be able to have this conversation. So, you know, as we grow, being able to, you know, take it to the forefront of reality, you know, on the news, the mainstream media that's so caught up in, you know, closer to the opposite end of the spectrum, to be able to have this conversation and explain it in a way that, you know, is hard to argue, is always a lot of fun, because they're clinging to certain things. And as you point out, the obviousness of, you know, how distorted that viewpoint is, how caught up in an illusion it is, even if it makes you comfortable, doesn't make it the reality of what it is. And so just being able to talk about this more and more in front of, you know, more people, and get the word into some of those places that are kind of, you're more or less unable to get there without doing some big, crazy, extravagant stuff. So as we do that, you know, I'm sure that will increase, and those options and opportunities will increase as well. But yeah, the day we can start, you know, putting up billboards, just doing shit because we can, and making those crazy ripples, is going to be an exciting day.
Yeah, I agree. And it really is because, and it's funny, we were talking about this, and often it's so interesting because the ego wants a quick solution to a problem. And so when we look at the world, we go, okay, well, we got to create some social programs, we got to create some safety net. Like we have to create a way to help people who are being crushed by this incredibly unfair system. We have to find a way to, create community gardens, and we have to find a way to advocate for tribes, and we have to, find a way to do all these things, and that's all great. But it's kind of like going to therapy when your life is a burning shit show. That therapy might help a little bit, but then you're going back to your life. And so that's kind of the problem, is that as much as we have great ideas for solving certain problems in terms of the environment, or in terms of, again, helping people eat or homelessness, things like that, the system that we're trying to implement those solutions in is toxic. The system continues to tear down our progress or our potential just by virtue of how it's built, right? And so as much as it's important to be out there and advocate for those things, I think it's also important to tackle the mentality as a whole. And I think that that's what John Lennon was trying to do in his billboards, that war is over. And again, I love that as an example. I think that's something that we need to do more of, but I think corporate profiteering gets in the way of that. And what I mean is that there are a lot of commercials, oddly enough, if you watch, there are some commercials that actually have quite insightful messages that are then undercut by the need to promote a brand all the time. I remember there was this commercial, can't remember which car manufacturer it was for, but basically this person is driving through the countryside. It's just rolling fields all around them in this highway that's going through. And they're driving along and they're thinking like, oh God, work was really tough today. And you can hear this inner monologue that they're going through in their head about, such and such. I don't think Sally likes me. And, I wonder what I'm going to do tomorrow. And then all of a sudden the car just stops, like all of time just freezes. And this person stops thinking and they look around at the field, and the whole thing slows right down to this moment where this person's in the moment, appreciating where they are, and they go, wonder what's for dinner tonight. Zoom, and it picks up again, and you can see the insight there. You're like, that's brilliant. And then the next line is, just get yourself a Kia or something like that. Like it really is just about marketing the product to be more in the present. Like, and they tie it together that way. Another car manufacturer, this was years ago, it was this guy standing in front of a building. This was the commercial. And he's like, you don't need to be tied down to your job. You don't need to know what's going to happen tomorrow. And he's talking about embracing uncertainty. And then the next line was, you can own this SUV. And it was very much, getting off the beaten path and using that whole symbolism and everything else. And you're just like, oh, I understand why Bill Hicks was so against marketers, right? Like that's his whole joke. It's like, marketers, you're machinations of evil, that kind of thing. And it's just because you can take something that's so beautiful and twist it to your advantage. And that's what gets me, is that how many messages are there, how many messages consciousness is throwing out, our awareness is throwing up like bubbles boiling to the surface, and they get distorted by profiteering. They get distorted by the company that's paying that person for their time, rather than that person's time just being expressed for the rest of us. And so I think it would be incredibly powerful to just start creating really, really profound commercials, really profound billboards, things like that, without any advertising, without any branding whatsoever. This message brought to you by you. That kind of thing. And just to have enough to just pound on the media just over and over and over and over again, just to start diluting their muddy water with, let's just say, cleaning the water a little bit, adding some purity to it, getting all of that toxicity out of the way by actually introducing the opposite, selflessness, for selflessness' sake. I think that would be beautiful. I would love to see that. And that's very much the point. And so going back to Patreon supporters, until we can get to a point, and I'm not gonna lie, like right now, the Dualistic Unity podcast, for everybody who would like an update, is soaring. Like our traffic continues to grow by leaps and bounds every week. Week by week by week, we are breaking previous records and setting new records for ourselves in terms of traffic, in terms of engagement, in terms of how many podcasts are being downloaded from day to day to day. Last month, we were over 60,000 plays on the podcast alone, not counting everything on YouTube, right? Or any of the other platforms that are hosting our videos. And so we're growing all the time. You got to consider our first month, I think we got close to 300 total plays in that first month, right? And we do that in an hour now. So we are excelling and we are growing, but we are not at a point yet where frankly, we're pulling in the advertisers, like say the Joe Rogan show. We're not there yet, but we are rapidly excelling. Like when you look at the other podcasts in our category or even in other categories and you compare our traffic, we're picking up fast. We really are. We are going to start getting more and more attention, and we are going to be able to start putting more and more resources into pushing this in front of the world and just getting it out there so more people know this conversation's here, because that's the thing. How many of us listening to the podcast, how many of us getting into this conversation just think to yourself, where was this? It's here. It's just that we're not marketing it. Like we don't have the advertising revenue to push it out there right now. And so we really are just having faith in the organic growth that it's going to reach the right people. And it has, in that it reached you. And here you are. And we're doing something with it together. So I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm very excited. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone in our Discord, everyone on Patreon, everybody who's in the comment section right now. It means so much that you're here. It means so much that this means so much to you.
Amen. Let me know if my audio is clipping at all. Yours was good, and then the last like minute it was clipping. I'm assuming it's on my end, but yeah, let me know. I could probably try and get I told everyone in the house to get off Wi-Fi. So anyway, yeah, with the commercials, I mean, those are so funny. The ones where it's like, and he's saying that Bill Hicks just talking shit on marketers makes so much sense, because they know where to pull you, and then as soon as you're at that like sweet spot of vulnerability, they're like, brand, buy this, you need it because you're not enough. It's like, what? You're so close. So being able to do those things, and then just like as soon as everyone's like, what are they going to sell? What are they going to sell? It's just brought to you by you. It's going to be like, what's going on? People are going to think they're tripping or something. And that's going to be a blast. But yeah, those are pretty funny. The key, wait, I'm curious though, how did Kia tie that one in? Like they stop, all their thoughts stop in a field. Were they saying that if you have a Kia, that'll be your experience basically?
Because you're driving, it's such a smooth ride going through the countryside. You'll come closer to the moment and see how it's so easy to twist, right? Like it's so easy to twist, and it's because like life in itself, moment to moment, if you just relax, is beautiful. But our brain immediately looks for a reason that it's beautiful. It immediately looks for a justification for that experience, and so all marketers have to do is go, "It's this." This is the reason. And our brain goes, sweet, I need to have that. And that's how hard it is to pander to us. It really is like really simple to market to people, especially in a certain state of mind, because we feel like we're lacking, and anything that will make that go away, especially if it's something simple, well, that seems like a really good idea. You know, the problem is that there's always a cost, there's always a consequence, and we don't learn that for a very long time. You know, it takes a long time of being manipulated by others before you start to recognize that people can be manipulative, right? Because we don't necessarily know that going out into the world, especially if you don't want to be manipulative. It's always a temptation to see the world the way that, you know, to see people in the same way that you would see yourself. Like, I don't want to take advantage of other people. Why would anybody else want to take advantage of people? Where are you going with my purse? You know, that kind of thing. And that's it, is that we don't see it because we haven't recognized necessarily that life is tough. You know, this is the hardest thing I think about a world where we have such horrors in terms of violence and theft and rape and murder and so on and so forth. I mean, the world that we live in right now it's difficult. it's difficult, but it's important to understand that these things happen from the extreme end of disconnection. It's kind of like I was saying in one of my videos that colonization is the extreme end of ego, right? Like at the end of the day, when you carry the ego far enough without any checks or balances, you end up wiping out other people who don't agree with you. That's the far end of ego. So when we look at the world right now and the horrors that are happening, we'd go, oh, that's human nature. It's like, no, in the far end of ego, yeah, that's the point. And that's how far out of whack we are. Whereas if we were to limit that, if we were to mitigate that or reduce that, actually start adding some context and awareness in a conversation that makes us recognize how disconnected we are, it starts to change the spectrum for everybody. All of a sudden, the darkness becomes a little bit more gray because the white has become a little bit more white. Does that make sense? Like a lot of that gray ends up becoming a little bit lighter too, because we are lightening it up and lightening up ourselves. Well, all of a sudden, those horrors that happen in the corners in the dark, they don't have the dark to hide in. And so they don't happen as often. But it really is just about recognizing it. You can't fight monsters that we're creating. They're never going to end. We have to stop making the monsters rather than just trying to make them go away. We have to look at the environment that created them. And once we change that over time, and that's that patience game again. So it's a balance. It's not like you don't want to be out there stopping people from committing crime, right? But on the other hand, you don't want to blame them solely for the need for crime, because there's more to it than that. And I think that's a really important balance to keep.
Yeah, it's like that balance between maintaining the mentality and taking the action. So yeah, that's how I saw what you're saying, at least, because as much as we do things, we put things out there, and we're doing this podcast. That's choosing to do something, put something out there. But how well can you maintain that mentality, which is of primary importance, while you're doing the thing that you're doing? So if you're sacrificing a shitload of that mentality in order to make change, like you're trying to make change because you're so fucking angry and suffering all the time, like that's going to do less good than bad, because you're influencing the mentality that's ultimately going to be what shifts everything. So we do things in order to help that mentality shift happen. But if we're doing it without the mentality, it can't impact the mentality. Like it can, but like not really. Even if you are in that mentality, the reality of what's going to happen, no matter how good your intentions are, no matter how much you do, if it's instilled with that or riddled with that mentality of getting rid of your own suffering and anger and disgust and despair with the way things are, it's going to influence all of the actions that you take. And so if you're not coming from the mentality of freedom in yourself, you're going to have influence on the things that you do no matter what. So it's very important to maintain that balance, but also understand that mentality is key. And if you're trying to do something without the mentality, you're better off not doing it and focusing on yourself until you're in a state of that mentality of freedom, freeing yourself, and then go do stuff. And it's not to say that some frustration, some anger doesn't arise, but it doesn't, become your primary focus and reason for doing it. It's just there, and it can be sort of like a, get the gears running, get the car started. But if that's, what's progressing the car, then it's just gonna, you're gonna be crop dust and anger and frustration all over reality with everything that you do.
Yeah, that's why it's interesting, because all of a sudden the ego will do something that's totally counterintuitive to what we actually want to do, but we're soothing the ego so it doesn't see it. Like we'll become intolerant of intolerance, right? Or we'll have a zero tolerance policy against bullying. They're kind of bullying the bullies, right? Or We're going to stamp out terrorism by bombing the crap out of the families of people who will eventually become terrorists as a result of us doing that. Like we get in the way all the time, and it's just because we want that quick control. We want that sense of peace and certainty and everything else. And so we don't even recognize where we're doing the opposite of what we want. Right. It's just that our brain's just like, no, look, you can just get what you want this way. It's like there's so many more considerations. There's always considerations. This is why when you start waking up, you start recognizing like, oh, wow, everything I do has a ripple, everything. And you can't control that ripple. You can do your best, but it's always going to have a ripple. And so you always want to maintain awareness, right? You always want to be watching for that thing. This is something that Ron Paul, I don't know if you know of Ron Paul. He was in the American government for a very long time. Rand Paul is his son, who is not nearly as interesting. Ron Paul was actually just a really interesting person. But one of the things that he caught a lot of flack for, outside of exposing the Federal Reserve for 30 years, was the fact that he was talking about political blowback, and had been for a long time, basically telling, the Senate and Congress that, yeah, of course the people in the Middle East and so on are pissed with us. Of course we're having terrorist threats. We've been over there bombing them for 20 years. Like we've been over there in their shit for our own reasons forever. And you're all acting like we didn't see this coming, that we didn't actually in some way instigate this. And that all seems, relatively common sense, doesn't it? When you look at the history and you go, yeah, somebody was bombing the crap out of my backyard, I'd be pretty pissed too if it kept happening over decades. My children might get some ideas, that kind of thing, right? And so you look at that and you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think anybody listened to him? No. They basically vilified the crap out of him. Oh, you're not an American. You're not in this with us. And he's like, why? Because I'm advocating for some degree of accountability. Right. But this is the same guy who was talking about the debt ceiling in the 80s. This is the same guy who was talking about Keynesian economics in the 80s. He was talking about the economy and the problems that we're having right now. And he was consistent for all of that time. Right. And it always just came back down to accountability. And this is a guy who was a medic in the war. Right. So to him, it's always just about what can be done right now. He was a doctor as well, right? So his instincts were not that of a politician. His instincts were that primarily of a human being who believed in well, he's a libertarian, so that says a lot about him as well. Right? Ron Paul was a fascinating character, fascinating. He ran for president twice in 2008 and 2012. And it's such a shame. There was such a huge movement behind him in the same, it was very much like Bernie Sanders. A lot of the Ron Paul people ended up moving towards Bernie Sanders. Despite the fact that there are some differences, there's also a lot of similarities for sure. But that organic movement gets crushed by the system. Like each and every time. Like look at what happened with Bernie and Hillary, right? Like you can say like, oh well, she won fair and square. It's like, did you look at the slant? Did you see how much money was put in behind her? How much they blatantly ignored everything that Bernie was doing? Like that guy would have had way more press, and he would have crushed Trump. He would have crushed Trump. It would have been such an interesting debate to watch because Bernie doesn't pull punches. Right? He would have looked at Trump's little egotism and just called him on it. It's like, you understand, you're saying a lot of nothing, right? Like it would have been the best, it would have been just awesome. But instead we ended up with a politician playing politics, and that politician lost because straight up Trump was more egotistical in an egotistical game. Right? And that's politics. That's the reason nothing's working. It's because there's no common sense in it. We're too busy playing to the ego.
Yeah, the all the Ron Paul stuff is just fascinating. But even on the side of, with the Hillary Bernie, it's so funny how it's obvious when you put more money into, a marketing and a campaign for something that is just, a choice between people, and you get more people interested. Like, of course, that person's going to get more interest and more votes. And it's right in our faces, like the corruption and the skewed and the ability to have the impact. Sure, they're not like writing in the votes literally over and over and over, but that's how we work. Like that's how psychology works. That's how marketing works. And to think that it's not fucking skewed like that and rigged like that is just hilarious, because it's not just about, you know, the specific thing. It's everything that goes into everything leading up to it that's going to have impact. But Ron Paul, I'm very interested in him now. I've heard of him and some of the stuff he did, but I didn't know that much. And all the stuff he was talking about, that's
The
really
dude tried to create a counter currency. It was the Ron Paul Liberty dollars.
the Liberty dollar. Yeah. That's what I've heard.
Holy fuck, the Fed shut that down fast. Holy shit.
Yeah,
but that's it. Like he comes from the school of Austrian economics, and they look at economics in an entirely different way. It's not that, you know, dig a hole, then pay someone else to come fill it in economics. Their economics is actually based on the idea that there should be value created. That is through the actual creation of value that the economy continues to go, but you get less bubbles, right? Like the bubbles that we see in our economy are pretty standard for Keynesian economics, right? Because it's just about inflating the money supply and then decreasing the money supply, and inflating the money supply. And so you get an overinvestment. There's a huge capacity for corruption over time, right? And so Ron Paul, who comes from a different school of economics, has been trying to draw attention to that forever. You can go back and find documentaries from like the early 80s on the money supply and the system and the Federal Reserve and Jekyll Island and all that stuff. Like that stuff's been around for a long time. It's been around for a long time. A lot of people are just starting to come to awareness of it in terms of like the Federal Reserve and where money comes from and the corruption behind it. But it's been around forever. It's just that it was always a very small population of people who were called conspiracy theorists, who were looked at and been like, oh yeah, where's your tinfoil hat? You know, that kind of thing. And the problem is that some of them were a little bit on the nutty side because it was so difficult to find this information, because you actually had to go out of your way to almost be a conspiracy theorist to even suss some of this out. And so, yeah, Ron Paul, he was around for so long. I'm sad that he's gone to some degree and that we're left with his idiot son. But and it's, again, like you can say what you like about Rand Paul, but he's nothing like his father. At the end of the day, he just doesn't have the integrity, and it's because he doesn't have the life experience. You know, he doesn't have that level of empathy. Ron Paul lived a very long life. You got to remember, he ran for president when he was, I think, in his 70s. Like he was pretty old when he ran, but you know, such fresh ideas. Same with Bernie, fresh ideas. And it's so funny to me because they will try to cater to the larger population because they know, you know, we all think in a certain way. We're not going to let that go overnight. But there's always one thing that the system's like, nope, don't agree with that. That I don't agree with. And it's just like one large shift that requires us to be more responsible. That's pretty much all it is. Right. And that's why these candidates never end up being the chosen candidate. And it's largely because we really don't have choice. You know, we have a choice between the candidates that the parties select. That's it. And they do so with their money, and they do so based on how they're going to keep that money rolling. So it's really not about what's best for us whatsoever. It's so interesting to watch it on the collective level because it's the very same thing that we do with our ego. We will know that certain things are good for us and then won't do them because they threaten the familiarity of how we've learned to live. Like we do it all the time in ourselves. And so this is why I think it's so glaringly obvious that that's why the system does it, is because we do it in ourselves. And so we're modeling it all the time on a collective level in everything that we do, whether we realize it or not. And so the only way to change it is to change ourselves. The only way to change it is to start being accountable, to actually look at the familiar, to look at the ego, to look at the fiction that's driven us nuts for generations, and look at it and actually see it. And that's it. That's the only thing we have to do, is look at it and actually see it. You don't need to form a plan or a strategy for taking that shit down, because that's the same illusion. You just have to be aware. And that's the one thing that we lack. We lack an awareness of the cycles that we fall prey to, or we fall victim to constantly. You know, and that's the only reason we fall victim to them, is because we lack awareness of them. Somebody was saying this yesterday in the dating workshop towards the close, and I thought it was such a fantastic insight that we fall into these cycles. And until we recognize the cycle, we can't break the cycle. Right? And that's the work, is the recognition of the cycle, which requires you to be willing to recognize the cycle, which requires you to have courage and faith. And it always comes back down to the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The with the shit, I had something about that last thing. Whatever. I also wanted to bring up Ron Paul's still alive, actually. He's 87, still kicking. And yeah, he's into Bitcoin as well. Big Bitcoin guy. So he could be he would be a fascinating person to have on the podcast if that would be a possibility. I think that would be really cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that'd be awesome, because I was a huge fan of Ron Paul and I don't even live in the States. That's the funniest part about this. It's interesting because I tend to be a little bit more interested in American politics than I am in Canadian politics. And people have asked me why, because obviously I live in quote unquote Canada. And it's for the same reason that at one point the entire world was focused on the politics of Rome. You know, that's the spoke. Or that's the hub of the wheel, and we're all kind of revolving around it. You know, so that's what I watch right now, because there's more ripples from that than anything else, right? But that's changing very quickly with everything that's happening overseas. And so, yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive. It really is. But yeah, that'd be great to talk to Ron Paul over the years. I don't know. I'd really have the urge to ask him, like, what happened to your son there? Something's wrong.
I'm sure that would go over well. I would be curious. He's like plays it off like he can't say anything, but he's like, yeah, jackass. But yeah, what I was gonna say before too was with as above, so below, like recognizing the cycles, like seeing that you are the system is one of the most important things that we can do, just like seeing that you are the world, seeing that you are reality, not something separate. So we have this idea of being separate, and therefore everything we do has to be outside of us. Like, I actually don't have to change myself because that's all the issue. And, you know, so I just have to focus on that and don't have to focus on myself or take any fucking responsibility for anything. And the reality is completely the opposite. Like, as you change, all of that begins to change. And I was going back and forth with someone in my Instagram comments a couple of days ago. They were saying how we're not the system. Like the system is, they just see the system as something outside of us, like a separate, completely separate entity. And to see it that way, just it allows you to not do anything and just keep blaming something else. Like, it's hard for me to see it as separate anymore. Like, I get it, I guess, because even in talking about it, like, oh, the system shifting, blah, blah, blah. But so I guess it's just a very important thing to recognize that we are the system, but it isn't a common recognition at all, because we constantly just want to blame something else, voice responsibility, not take responsibility. Everything's everyone else's fault but mine. And that shift from not everything being your fault, but everything, recognizing that everything's your responsibility, but also recognizing the reality of the influence that you have and how you're not going to tackle everything at once, but your responsibility is to be free in yourself, is kind of like your only responsibility at the end of the day. And through recognizing that responsibility, other things arise, but it always happens through the recognition of freedom in yourself. Everything else just makes a lot more sense to do, to help other iterations of yourself see things a little bit more clearly. Other, things that we're like, what should we do about our society? It's like, let's recognize the freedom in ourselves first, and then some answers may arise through that recognition. But it's always through the recognition, like, how peace arises through the acceptance of the situation you're going through, letting go of resistance. It's not a place that you find, but it's something that arises in certain states of mind. But we have the idea that, society is outside of us, something separate we have to change. Peace is outside of us, somewhere we have to get. And at any time, we have gaps between ourselves and other people, ourselves and society, ourselves and the place that we want to be in life, is going to be suffering. until we get there, but getting there is only recognizing that you already are. And so being where you're at allows all those things that we're trying to get to come through you and kind of just be expressed through you. It's like that counterintuitive paradox of, I guess it's kind of like that Chinese finger puzzle as well. It's like we keep pulling, keep reaching, and all we have to do is, dive deeper into where we're at and stop trying to be somewhere else. And then it all comes up.
But again, we have to be aware of that mechanism of the ego. We need to be aware of where we're actually investing in something that's making the problem worse without recognizing it. And so just because it's been, I don't know, 20 episodes since I pissed someone off, I figured I'd mention the transgender pronoun argument again, because this is kind of what I'm saying. So often the problem, in my opinion, it isn't necessarily the pronouns. It's the fact that we're attacking the problem from the same ego that drives the problem. And so what I mean is that you have a certain amount of people who think that the word he means a certain thing. And then you have other people who are like, well, I don't want to live within that. That's not how I identify. So I'm going to give myself another pronoun, and I'm going to basically expect everybody to use that pronoun. And so now you've got one side going, no, it means this. And then the other side going, you're right, but we want to be this. And the other, and that invalidates that side. And so you've got the ego feeling invalidated on one side or the other. And there's that argument, right? So to me, and I was saying this to you the other day, it would be more transformative, more progressive even, to not identify as the opposite gender and still change. So if you want to wear a dress and you are quote unquote a he, don't change the pronoun, change what it means. Do what you want, still use the pronoun. Force everybody who's got a very limited vision of that pronoun to widen it, so it's not so restrictive, as opposed to forcing them to just respect your pronoun. Disrespect theirs. Disrespect the fact that it was ever as limited and narrow as it was by taking it on and redefining it. It's kind of like the word God. You have any idea how many people get pissed off at me because I use the word God? Oh, well, there's so many different meanings behind that. You're obviously going to get into an argument. Yeah, I probably am. While we redefine the word, which is in the best interest of everyone. But if I go around and create a new word for God in order to have a conversation that's more in line with how I see things, I'm going to have to go through so much work just to bridge that gap between the word that I'm using and people's lack of understanding of it. And isn't that exactly what's happening with the transgender pronoun thing? Like, you have to educate so many people because you're identifying as this thing that they don't understand, whereas you could quite easily identify as the thing that they do understand and then change their understanding of it. That would be more progressive, in my opinion, because that would help in terms of future generations, let's say future little boys, being raised as a he and not having that restrictive vision of what he means, as opposed to still growing up in that restrictive vision and having to feel like you have to break out of it because nobody is breaking it down. I think that would be more progressive. But I think the ego's response, as always, is to define itself, to set itself apart, to value itself via comparison to your assumptions of somebody who identifies differently. And then we wonder why we're in a constant state of conflict. The conflict's going to be there, but are we actually creating two sides? Because if we're creating two sides, the conflict is always going to be there. Where if we're breaking down the argument to recognize we're all in it together, and we let go of those two sides, we just start changing the context, changing the environment itself, that breaks down that egotistical battle. That breaks down the capacity for conflict over time, because we're getting rid of the reason for the conflict, the illusion of division. But we can't get out of conflict and reinforce division. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. But the ego doesn't want to listen to that. It just wants to self-define.
We would rather feel special than actually make change, I think, is what a lot of those come down to. But that was a really great parallel right there between redefining the word God and using it, redefining the labels he and she and using it. Like those things actually create change, because when you're given, the God example, talking about that, you're not going to have as much of an impact on reality if you try and pick a different word and change that, because that then everyone who's comfortable in their fucking made up idea of God don't have to change at all. They don't, not that they have to change, but they don't have to question anything, which will lead to the change, because we're not forcing anyone to change. We're just asking questions, and some of those questions just happen to make people uncomfortable. But it's the same for the pronouns he and she and what those mean, because that's really what people want to change. But the way we're going about it is through the lens of wanting to feel special, rather than sacrificing our desire to feel special in order to have an actual impact on what those fucking words even mean, because they don't mean anything. They're just penis and vagina is all it means. Everything else, man should be that, Andrew Tate mentality, all that shit. Like men should be this and women should be this. Men should be dominant, women submissive. It's all made up bullshit. And people will point to like genetic shifts, historical ancestral days. And it's like, that was still a product of that happening over time for a very long time. And just because there are differences in, stature and average weight and everything and strength and whatnot, doesn't mean that those categories are the truth of what it is. There's still labels placed on top of it. There's still things that we've gotten used to that make us more comfortable because we can settle upon them and be like, oh, a man's this and a woman's this. Like, no, everything we settle upon are just ideas. So redefining what those mean would be way more fucking progressive than just, instead of thinking, oh, I don't fit this box, so I'm going to force myself to fit into this box, because you're still in the same game of identity, comparison, value, fluctuating value, all of those things, and what you're doing means about you, and the way that other people see you, what that means about you. Redefining those, similar to redefining God, taking that word back, is going to have such a bigger ripple on reality, instead of just circling the same type of thing, because it's the same mentality. Shifting those, using a different word for God, using a different, putting yourself in a different box, doesn't actually change anything. It keeps us in the same mentality and allows you to feel temporarily special until someone comes around and asks you a question.
Yeah. And I wanted to address a comment here because it was left, and I think it's really important. But when trans people change via their hormones, human word noises, their behavior definitely changes. Yeah. So, see, that's the thing. Like, if a woman decides she wants to take testosterone because she wants to change physiologically, it matches more with her personality, whatever it might be, doesn't matter. They don't have to redefine themselves as a man in order to do that, in order to go through that transition. Because, and again, this is just my mentality, to me, it's more inclusive to not do so. Because if you're a woman with a higher level of testosterone, that happens. You understand? Like, women and men aren't actually this black and white dichotomy that we like to think of it. There are men with more testosterone and men with less testosterone. There's women with more testosterone and women with less testosterone. Like, that's a thing. And so you don't necessarily have to jump out of the pool just because you have more testosterone. There's people in the pool who have more testosterone who aren't identifying as male either. So to me, that's more inclusive. You see what I mean? Like, you're widening the context. If anything, you're making the women who have a higher level of testosterone feel more inclusive as a woman, because you don't think they're being judged as not being the ideal of she. And you're doing them a favor by breaking that wide open, aren't you? Doesn't matter if your behavior changes. Doesn't matter about your hormones. It really doesn't. You understand? Like, you can be whatever it is you want to be as a person. That has nothing to do with your definition. That has to do with what you do moment to moment in your life. That's it. Your hormone levels don't indicate what you are. They just change your behavior a little bit. Right? And that's okay. But what we're talking about is the fact that We really do get lost in this idea that we have to change our idea of who we are just because we are changing. We were never our idea of who we were. It's always changing until we start to hold on to it. And that's what gets in our way. That's all we're saying, right? Is instead of doubling down on another identity, question identity, question it as being the restrictive box that everybody perceives it to be, because it's not. It's just that we've gotten into the habit of making it that way. That's all it is. At the end of the day, and this is why I will often get in trouble for this view, and this is why I haven't talked about this in 20 some odd episodes, for sure. The idea that sex and gender are two different things is an unfortunate thing, because it means that gender has become a concept instead of just a way of telling biology. It's like Andrew was saying, this is what I was saying to Andrew the other day in terms of like bathrooms and whatnot. We can get rid of the whole argument by just saying penises and vaginas, right? Because then we're getting rid of the gender. Then we're getting rid of the social construct and we're breaking it right down to the biology, right? Because that's all it was ever really meant to be. But then we started forming ideas based on our need to identify. It wasn't just that you have a penis or that you don't, it's that it means something about you. And that's where we went wrong. That's where everything got all confused. That's where the problem comes from. Not addressing that isn't going to fix it. Going farther in that direction is just going to make it harder to deal with. So I think we should tear down the original concepts rather than making more.
Yeah. The fact that we think that the labels mean something about us is fascinating, but also makes sense because we're always trying to just like fall into certainties about things. So we're going to build made up ideas in order to feel more certain about those things. And someone followed up, or same person followed up, even Teal Swan says different energies via different genders. It's like, yeah, okay. And like this idea that, men and women are different sizes, different energies, whatever. It's the same type of thing with the testosterone, like the overlapping testosterone. There are women who have more testosterone than certain men. It's not this objective thing with like a divide and a gap in between the two parties. It's the same with energies. Every single person has different energies at every different moment of the day. I'm going to go through a bajillion energies throughout today. Some of them would be felt more so by some women and more so by some men. And sure, you can always like group things the way you want to see them, but that has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. I mean, like it does, but the reality of the energies isn't that they are on this, two boxes. It's on a spectrum, and there are men and women on both ends of the spectrum at all times. Just because there's a few more women and a few more men in certain spots doesn't mean that we should try and fit ourselves into that box. It's recognizing that we're going to experience all of those things differently throughout the day, and our biology has impact, but it doesn't. And it also doesn't mean that we should try and change our biology in order to fit into a measured thing that we then categorize. It's like we're experiencing reality, and then we're measuring different things, and then we're like, okay, most of these people that we measured fit into this box. If you're in this box and you think you should be in this box, you should jump over here and change the thing that we were originally measuring because we want those boxes. If that made any sense. I don't know if that made sense, but if we want these, because we always want the boxes, we want a box instead of just being free in yourself is not putting yourself into so many boxes, but we think that our value is derived from the boxes that we sit in. And so if we don't feel comfortable in a certain box, we're like, oh, I must be in this box. Like, you were never in any fucking boxes. Stop trying to put yourself in so many fucking boxes. They don't help.
We had a follow up here. So me as a gay man is not out of balance if I'm passive throughout my life, because I'm a man who's passive. That would make me out of balance. Why would that make you out of balance? Because you have an idea of a man not being passive. There are lots of different types of men. The idea that a man is a certain way is the problem. See what I'm saying? You're just you. all of that stuff is extra. All that stuff is just concept and conditioning over time. And the fact is that it doesn't mean anything about you that you're passive. You're not contradicting any concept you're supposed to be. You're not a concept. You're you. See, that's all we're really saying, is that whatever idea you have of yourself is just a tool until it becomes a prison. Right? There is no such thing as a man in terms of personality. There isn't. You know, all men have different personalities. It doesn't make them less of a man to act less like the majority, if that makes sense to you, because that's really all we're saying. Oh, majority act like this. Therefore, if I'm not acting like that, I'm not part of that category. There's a lot of gray area. It's interesting how quickly our brain wants to create black and whites, right? It just wants to make the argument it's either this or that all the time. Life is nothing but gray area. It's the same thing that we were talking about early on in the podcast in terms of thinking about hot and cold. People tend to think about hot and cold, not recognizing that there is no hot and cold. There's just temperature on a spectrum. Same, but the brain doesn't think of it that way. The brain makes it a simple matter of opposites, comparable opposites. But that's not life. That's just your brain oversimplifying. And that's what we do in terms of he and she. We oversimplify for convenience, for the sake of identifying ourselves and coming up with a sense of value and coming up with a sense of certainty and all that, because what's the benefit of being told what a man is? Now you know what you're supposed to try and be, right? And that's the problem. Because whatever you were told a man is, isn't. That's not the point. You were probably told that by somebody who's insecure and desperate to define themselves.
Yes, there was another follow-up, but you pretty much just covered everything in what you just said. I know identity is a concept, but the whole point is to transcend this instead of just believe in it. We can't intellectualize ourselves out of identity. You guys are in a box right now. Only your box. What box are you putting us in right now? Through believing that, you know, the point of it is to transcend it, and we can't intellectualize our way out of identities. And it's the same kind of argument with, you know, not having a belief is a belief, you know, not letting go of recognizing concepts aren't truth is a concept. It's like, all right, can we recognize that and then continue on with the discussion? Because it's not about not using concepts. It's not about, you know, denying the reality of concepts, the reality of myself. It's about recognizing that it isn't the truth and moving forward, understanding that any concept that you settle upon about yourself, about the way a man or a woman should be, about the way reality is, about the way someone else is, about the way your situation that you're going through right now is, understanding that all of those things that we're going through and all of the ideas of what things are aren't the reality of what they are. So the idea that you have of yourself is never the reality of yourself. If you can understand that your perception of reality isn't the truth of reality, you still go on having that perception of reality, but there isn't so much weight anymore. There isn't so much gravity to everything, because you know deep down, yes, I'm perceiving this way, but it isn't the truth. And so it isn't taken to be the truth. And that shift in that recognition is the key. It's not about disregarding them. It's not about, you know, I'm not this at all. Like there is no me, whatever, all that sort of non-duality stuff. It's about recognizing simply that whatever you think it is, the me that you think you are isn't the reality of what you are. You are what's left when you recognize that none of those concepts are the truth. Reality is what's left when you recognize that all of your ideas of reality are the truth. God is what's left when you recognize that any idea of God is not the reality of God. It's what's left, but our brain can't, you know, put a finger on that thing that's left because it's all uncertain. You are uncertain. Reality is perpetually uncertain. So we can't put our finger on it, but we do our best to do so because that's what our brain does. It tries to put a finger on everything so that you can feel more comfortable, because uncertainty is uncomfortable when you've been clinging to false certainty to feel more comfortable your entire life. But, you know, that's where freedom lies. So as you cling to that certainty, as you perceive everything to be in a box and your idea of what that box is the reality of it, you're going to keep keep suffering because you're continuing to cling to, prisons that you think you're going to find freedom in.
It's interesting because I say this through experience. And what I mean is, so anybody who's been listening to the podcast has an idea that my life was relatively challenging, let's just say. And as a result, I got drilled with the whole, be a man thing. And of course, that means, don't show any emotion, suck it up, don't communicate, that kind of thing. Just keep going, power on through, and all that. And as a result, you take yourself very seriously. You try to be all manly and tough, and so on and so forth. You never show emotions. You're never just silly for the sake of being silly, that kind of thing. And then I had a daughter, and for me, that process was so very educational, because having a kid, you just got to play, you just got to let go. And having a daughter, you can't validate your idea of being a male through your daughter, right? And so you really are letting go of that idea of being he. You're letting go of what it means to be he. All of a sudden, you're doing silly things, like putting on stupid hats and running around and giggling and making funny noises and doing all that fun stuff. Whereas, you can almost hear the adult males from your past judging you and calling you derisive names. And it's because they were all self-validating in themselves, right? And so this is what I mean. Like, it's really important to recognize that programming's in there, and to deliberately rip it apart, to deliberately question it, right? Because it was never the truth. It was just sold to us as truth by people who desperately wanted it and needed it to be the truth, because that's the only sense of value that they had, right? There's nothing more freeing than questioning that, letting go, and recognizing, like, I don't have to be any of that. It doesn't actually take away from my maleness. It's not like me running around the house making a weird any of that. It's not like all of a sudden my penis just fell off. And it's really important to recognize that. Like, it really has nothing to do with you as a person. Let go, relax, be yourself. It doesn't define you. And anybody who thinks it does is doing so for their own reasons. Once you recognize that, you're free.
Just making a note. I'm getting a clip of that out of there for sure. But people are so afraid of their value being diminished by not clinging to being the thing that they're told that they should be, that they keep doing it. And they do have a fear that their value's going to be diminished. So they start thinking that they need to do certain things. And we talked about this a lot in the dating workshop this weekend, but that need, to get someone to like you, to get in a marriage, to have kids, all of that. When those, the reality of them are wants, they're not actual needs. But when you think they're needs and you don't have them, you're going to keep suffering. And so when you think you need to be a certain thing in order to be a man, and you're not currently doing that thing, you're going to suffer. But the freedom lies in recognizing that there was never anything that you ever had to be. There's nothing you need to do right now to be anything, to gain any more value. There is never anything that you need to do, unless you're super hungry and should probably eat. But, again, that's a different discussion. But in terms of the things that we value ourselves based upon, there are very few needs out there. And all of the things that you think your value is being derived from are not needs. They're not. They're just prisons that you cling to, and thinking that you do need those things. It's only going to make your life a lot more difficult, because until you get them, you're not going to feel good. You're not going to feel fulfilled. And then you get them. And because that's your, state of mind, there's always, your value is derived relative to everyone else's, your perception of everyone else's value, their perception of you. As soon as you get the thing, there's a new group that you're comparing yourself to, and you got to get another thing. And, you temporarily feel all right because you got the thing finally, and then you start wanting something else. And I'm not enough until I get this. And that's how we spend our lives. Like, a lot of people think that is, the human condition. They think that is the way it is. You keep striving for stuff. You keep setting goals. You keep reaching them. And then, you get a new checkpoint, and then you're not good enough until you reach the next one. People think that's how society, like reality actually is. Like, the way it's meant to be is that's how lost in feeling like we're not enough has become because we're caught up in thinking we are the idea of what we think we are. But, as you let go of that, it's just freedom in everything, when there's no need for anything to go a certain way because your value is no longer attached to the thing happening or the outcome that you thought would bring you more value. You're free. Like, you can do anything, and everything just becomes so much more enjoyable. It's it's fucking incredible.
Yeah, it really is. But I just wanted to follow up because there was a comment here, and then we're going to move on to somebody else's question. Yeah, but both of you still present as normal heterosexuals. Now, see, that's the mentality right there that I'm talking about. And it's simply because you have an idea, one, of normal, and two, heterosexual, that normal and heterosexual are somehow the same thing. The other point is that you have an idea, and that's the idea that has unfortunately made people not want to just be themselves forever. Like, you understand that if I don't even know how to describe this. If I was less male in your perception than I am right now, let's say I was talking about, I don't know, women's clothing, or I was talking about show tunes or something like that. I don't know, whatever you consider to be gay activity, whatever you might think that is. Does that mean I'm gay? No. In the same way that not talking about those things doesn't mean I'm hetero. See, doesn't mean anything. You have an idea of what it means, and that's not what it means. Okay? There is no way to act normal and heterosexual. Just be yourself. You can try and act normal and heterosexual, but all that is again, it's a generalization. There are a lot of heterosexual people out there that you might assume are gay because you have an idea of what a gay person acts like, not because they actually are, not because they're any less male, but because you have an idea that they are. It's the only thing that separates them. And in fact, is you don't know anything about either Andrew or myself or our sexuality unless you've been listening to the podcast, in which case you've picked up clues here and there throughout the whole thing, like the fact that I'm married and whatnot, right? But at face value, if you're to just walk into the conversation, look at the two of us and go, wow, you two are obviously heterosexual. That's all you. That is all you. It really is important to recognize that it's all you. And and that goes back to the second question, which I wanted to address very quickly. Why do we want to validate the belief of who we are? And if the answer is to be comfortable, what does that mean? I don't think it's to be comfortable. I think it's so we're not uncertain. See, it's not necessarily comfort as the focus, nor is it security as the focus. Those are just the byproducts. That's just the direction we go in. The focus is getting away from the fear. The focus is getting away from the uncertainty. The focus is not knowing what reality is, not being able to put it in this very neat little black and white dichotomy, not being able to just categorize it and go, okay, I know what that is now. I don't need to question it anymore. That's why. Once we have an idea of ourselves, we're no longer a question mark. We don't have to be as aware. We don't have to be as sensitive. We can just focus on what we want and justify that. See? That's why. It simplifies things, but it cuts us off to everything else. It's the equivalent of an antidepressant, very much as Andrew was saying the other day. It numbs us. That's the point of the ego. Self-definition numbs us to the present.
Yeah, and then as we build that idea of ourselves too, we get trapped by it. Like, it limits our ability to try new things because we don't see ourselves in that way, and then we have to maintain it. Like, it takes effort to maintain the idea of yourself. It's not just like, you settle upon it. It's like, okay, there's that false certainty. I can set that aside, never have to worry about it again. Like, you have to keep thinking about yourself all the time. Someone asked me last year on an Instagram, like, is it tiring not thinking about yourself as much or something like that? And I was like, or is it tiring talking about the stuff you talk about all the time? And I said, absolutely not. What was tiring was thinking about myself all the time, because talking about anything we talk about, like, we come on here, talk about this stuff, we're off this, we go about our lives. It's not like constantly running through our mind, like a nonstop fucking clapping monkey mind type thing. Like, when I don't want to think about this stuff, I can stop. When you're caught up in the idea of yourself, it's very difficult to stop that. It's a constant thing. It's a constant process of, what does this mean about me? Where is my value? Where does my value lie here? And so, letting go of that idea, recognizing that you're never that idea, is the most important thing you can ever do. And I had a thought before that I got off track, and now I'm trying to get back to it. And I'm like, fuck it, it went so maintaining the idea. I think that was the main point I was trying to get across, that like that idea of yourself, once you settle upon it, it's not like, you're free from that. It's like you go to work, you go to prison, and then you're working all day to maintain that idea. And then as someone comes around and causes you to question something about yourself, it takes extra work to resist that natural flow of the questioning, of the letting go of an idea of yourself, because you have to, either argue with them, defend yourself, defend, your opinion of something, because you have to be right, or else that's going to diminish your value. So it is portrayed as this thing that, letting go of yourself is this task and this work. And I'm not to say that it isn't. The process of letting go of all of those certainties is work, because it can get very, very uncomfortable when that's been the fabric of your reality and the way that you see things. But maintaining it is a lot of work too, and much more arduous work once you've gotten to a point where you've let go of some things, to continue to maintain the idea and keep it around. That's something you got to do each and every moment. You got to remember, how to act to maintain the idea, as opposed to recognizing that you're none of those ideas. Then you can just, whatever comes out of your mouth is you being you. Whatever you do throughout the day is you being you. That is your purpose every single moment, what you're doing. It's not, fixated on this idea of this has to be what I do because this is going to raise my value, and I can't do this because it's going to lower my value, and then I may be diminished. It's, your value doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't go up and down. You're never what you think you are. And it over time is a much less energy suck, if not like the least energy suck, than trying to maintain the idea. It's the biggest energy suck.
Yeah, you definitely want to have less energy suck. Absolutely. I wanted to follow quickly up. You have to generalize to some extent. I can't pretend that I don't. You're absolutely right. Your brain does. Your brain will always generalize. That's its job. Its job is to categorize and contextualize and basically put things in neat little boxes for you. But the problem is if you let that do it on its own, you will increasingly end up in a narrower and narrower box. So it's not that you're not going to generalize. It's that if you don't watch for it, you'll take that as truth. That's the danger. That's the only danger. Your brain's going to generalize for convenience in order to process information, because if it's always caveating, if it's always like, well, except for this and this, and well, that, there's no processing that happens. Like it's like a bottleneck in the entire conveyor line, right? Like you just got to keep that in mind, that you're going to generalize, but the process of growth is questioning that generalization, right? The process of wisdom and context is to not take that at face value and not define yourself by it, right? But to recognize that it's happening for convenience sake, again. But if you're not on it, it'll take over your life. It really does. And that's where we're at societally right now. It's taken over our lives because we're not on it. We don't recognize that the brain's doing it all the time, just for the sake of survival. The brain doesn't understand that questioning is in its best interest. It's just trying to settle on an understanding, because the alternative is, once again, fear. Okay? And the only way out of that fear isn't the sense of control, which is what the ego wants to do. It's just like we're saying, the ego thinks in a certain way, right? But it's having faith in yourself. See, it's not about control, right? That kind of fear can only be balanced through faith. Not faith in something, but faith. Pure, white hot faith, right? Where you're just walking forward. That's it. And as you do that, you start to recognize that the fear is not something that stops you unless you give into it. That's why I like the expression that courage is not the absence of fear, it's carrying on despite it, right? I would say that that's also faith.
Yeah, that perspective shift is so important, like so powerful, just in recognizing that it's not about being afraid. It's just about whether or not you can do it despite that fear. It's not about how you feel, it's about what you do despite how you feel. I think for me is what it's always come down to. And it's changed my life for sure. Cause I used to think when I was younger, like, oh, if I could just get rid of these nerves, then I could go do that thing, as opposed to recognizing they don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can be afraid and do the thing still. And oftentimes that's the only way you can do it to start, until it starts to get quieter. But to think that it's going to completely go away, even after doing it a few times, is madness. Like, of course you're going to be afraid. Of course you're going to be afraid of things. And it's the process of doing it, because even just like a new situation that wouldn't typically be thought of as something that's scary, you're stepping into uncertainty. And if you're not practiced in stepping into uncertainty, your brain can't settle upon something. And so it jumps to fear and nerves. And so in order to make that jump, you can't get rid of the nerves and do it until your brain recognizes that it's, not the thing that it was afraid of, because it just made that up. And so letting go of that is very important, but recognizing that it's not about getting rid of anything, because that's, the most counterintuitive thing as well. And that's why I went through all the suffering that I went through, especially in high school, was because I would get nervous about something and think that I just had to get rid of the nerves in order to do it, and wouldn't do it until I got rid of them. So me trying to get rid of them was resisting them super hard, just making them so much worse. And then, get to a point where couldn't even say anything. And it was just like frozen, because there was so much desire to not be feeling the way that I was feeling, as opposed to, accepting it for what it is, kind of just relaxing into the spot that I was, recognizing that I don't have to do anything, be in any other state to do that thing. And so, yeah, that was just like a big long spiel on courage not being about getting rid of the fear, but facing it anyway, because it's super important, and something that's very, very important to understand, because a lot of what's peddled is only going to make it more difficult. Trying to get rid of any way that you're feeling only exacerbates it.
For sure. There was a question here I'm going to address very quickly, just because I can actually just point them to an episode. Where do we go when we die? It's a really long question. We actually covered this in a full episode that you can find in season 2. It's called Life and Death. I believe it's season 2, episode 10. It's a good episode. We really do get into the weeds of it. We talk about what existence is, what life is, what our perception of death might be, the whole thing, where we go, time, space, all of it. The perception of division. In my opinion, I think we deep dived on that subject about as well as we could in one episode. And if you have further questions after the fact, keep listening to the podcast, or reach out in a group, because we love to talk about this. It's just that we're running out of time, unfortunately. We have about 9 minutes left, and then we're going to be continuing on Patreon. It's a tier 1 group today, so that means for only $5 a month you can join. You can talk to us twice per week for 3 to 3.5 hours each and every week, which is always great. It's a good chance to not just connect with us, but to connect with the rest of the growing community. Can't recommend it enough. If you'd like to join us, we would love to see you. We'll be there at the top of the hour. I did want to address one more question here very quickly. So what if I want to buy a home? I just call a realtor and start the buying process, despite the fear I need the money first. I'd like to answer that with a yeah, no shit. And it's just because it's not like walking forward in faith means you're going to get everything you want. That's not faith. See what I'm saying? Like, you're still focused on what you want and needing that outcome in order to have the desired life that you think is going to make you happy. The whole point of faith is to let go of this need to get somewhere to be happy. It's your idea of yourself. It's your idea of your life and your perception of the world that's making you unhappy. In letting that go and having faith, you will find you have more ability to make money, to form alliances with people, to see opportunities, to go down different paths. And maybe that will take you towards your house down the road. But it's not a silver bullet. Nothing is. This is the whole problem with that manifestation kick. Like, if I just get in the right mindset, everything's going to come to me. No, you still have to participate. The whole point of this journey is to be in there doing it. It's not to walk through life getting everything that you want just because you want it. That's not going to make you happy as a person. So if you're asking in all honesty, if just walk your faith and forward, even despite my bank account, yeah, you go ahead. You can call that real estate agent. You can talk to them about the house. Maybe you'll have a nice conversation. Maybe you'll be able to see something that you can shoot for in the future. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. But maybe you'll have a conversation when you do that changes your life or offers a new opportunity. Maybe they'll recommend something. Maybe they'll mention something, somebody who bought a previous house or something like it and what they did for a career. Maybe that'll set you down a different path. Right? The whole thing is to walk forward in faith, not to shoot for an end result. So it's a way of living. It's not a strategy for getting what you want. That's not letting go. That's not having faith. So I just wanted to address that very quickly. It really is an entirely different way of perceiving the world and yourself. And it's not something you can just, oh, I'm just going to have faith now, because you don't know what that means. And your ego is going to give you an idea of what it means that it's not. As always, your brain wants to generalize. This is why one of my favorite expressions is always that there is no enlightenment. And oh, is that frustrating for people who are shooting for enlightenment, which is very much the point.
Yeah, shooting for it and only taking themselves further from it. Did want to shout out Brian. He is a Pennsylvania realtor. So actualize when you do come around to that and you are interested, give Brian a shot if you're interested in living in Pennsylvania. But yeah, it's one of the funniest things when you talk about having faith. Immediately people jump to like, oh, so I should just, lie in bed all day and have faith that I'm going to get $1 million. Like, it's so caught up in this idea that what you want is what you need, what you want is what's best for you. Like, oh, I just have to satisfy my desires. Like, have you been listening to any fucking thing we've been saying this entire call or on any of the episodes ever? It's not about getting what you want. It's about letting go of your need to have it, your desire for the want. Freedom happens now. It doesn't happen in a place when you get the thing. Peace happens now when you let go of thinking you should be feeling anything other than what you're feeling. Like, those things arise through you, through that letting go. But it's not something where you just, I let go of wanting to get anywhere and then I get what I want. It's like you're trying to get somewhere while you're saying you're letting go of what you want. Like, what does that even, what are you even talking about? So it's just funny, like, in those recognitions, like, it's not like you're going to live your life that differently in the actions that you do immediately. It's that your state shifts, your mentality shifts, and through that, your priorities shift, and through that, your actions shift, and then things change. But we always put the cart before the horse, and we're like, oh, so I just have to, take this action, and then I'm going to, $1 million is going to drop out of the sky, and then I'm going to buy that house. It's like, no, you have to let go of your need to do that. And then your priorities are going to shift. Your mentality, as your mentality changes, your priorities shift, your actions change. That action doesn't make as much sense anymore. Your reality changes. You're more free. And then, that thing may come full circle and come around. Something happens because you stumbled upon something, chatted with someone, opportunity arises, get a job, make money doing that job. And then, 10 years later, all of a sudden that house that you were looking at before, as you, let go of your need to get it, comes full circle and gets it. But we think, we have this fucking crazy ass egotistical mindset where we think that letting go means that immediately all of my desires will be fulfilled. It's like you're missing everything thinking that. But that's where the ego goes. That's the mentality that we're letting go of that will inform everything else we do in our lives. But it's not, temporarily letting go of it to immediately get everything we want. It's the opposite.
As always, everything is backwards, but it is a good question. And I'm glad it came up, because this is something that does come up very often in the journey. It is difficult to understand when you are used to thinking in a certain way about yourself as a fiction, and there's a different way of living that you haven't been experiencing to a large degree. Maybe you get glimpses of it here and there, right? But to actually apply it to day, so it's not just glimpses, but the majority of your experience. That's what changes. And it's a product of again, work. And that work is letting go, understanding what you're attached to, understanding that your brain's constantly trying to fixate on something and go, that's the truth. That's the truth. That's the truth. And therefore I'm this. That's all your brain's ever trying to do. That's its job. right? And so if you don't get in there and watch it doing that and say, that's not me, that's just the brain trying to figure out what the hell's going on, you're always going to end up categorizing yourself and building a smaller and smaller box. And more importantly, you're going to end up judging other people because you have to, without recognizing that it's part of the box. They go hand in hand. You try to stop judging, but you can't as long as you're in that box, because the judgment and the box are the same thing. So just keep that in mind, right? The brain doesn't understand this automatically. It doesn't get it. It's tricky. It's counterintuitive. It's paradoxical. There's a lot to this. So again, if you haven't as yet, do check out the Dualistic Unity podcast. We are on season 4 right now. Season 1 and 2 really get into the basics of all of this. Season 1, especially, in my opinion, season 1 is trippy as fuck. And I really recommend that you go and check it out. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. If you've listened to it before and it's been quite some time, you'll probably get other things out of there, because I definitely dropped some gems as we had that conversation. I'm looking forward to revisiting it myself. I know Andrew and I are planning on doing kind of a commentary series where we watch season 1 together. We pause it here and there, and we have a discussion about some of the things that we were talking about and comment on how far we've come since then. So that'll be coming up in the near future. We'll let everybody know on Patreon, of course. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Andrew, as always, for the fantastic conversation. I know this afternoon we're going to be trying something a little new with today's episode. Andrew and I are going to essentially try and do an episode without our eyeballs. We're going to try not looking at the screen and just listening very intensely to what we're saying and what's being said to us, and see what happens, see where the visuals take us and what the conversation ends up being. So we're hoping that that'll be a lot of fun, and we look forward to sharing that with you. We will chat about it a little bit more on Patreon in about 15 minutes. So we do hope to see you there.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that. It's gonna get trippy for sure, but very fun. Yeah, looking forward to seeing some of you on Patreon in a